He stepped into a grimy roadside cafe smelling of burnt fat and stale grounds, only to find the woman who had once guarded his future clearing crumbs for pocket change. This wasn't the morning Julian Vane had envisioned. He was supposed to be miles away in a high-rise in Chicago, dissecting corporate merger files from the climate-controlled comfort of a luxury sedan. Instead, a shredded tire on the interstate had dumped him on the outskirts of a ghost town in Indiana. The only sign of life was a crumbling shack called the Rusty Spoon. As he nudged the door open, a rusted chime groaned. The interior felt like a relic from a forgotten decade. Duct-taped stools, yellowed news clippings of high school basketball games, and a silent jukebox covered in a layer of grime. Julian adjusted his designer blazer, feeling like a neon sign in a room full of mechanics and laborers in mud-caked boots. He took a seat in a shadowed corner and pulled out his device, but a voice cut through his thoughts. "Morning. Want a menu or just some caffeine?" He looked up, and his heart skipped. Standing there with the stained notepad was Elena Thorne. It wasn't just someone who looked like her. It was the girl from his childhood, the one who had sat with him on fire escapes drilling him on vocabulary. The girl who had told him to hold his head high when the neighborhood bullies mocked his hand-me-down clothes. She was the one who had possessed more ambition than the rest of the city combined. Now, she wore a grease-stained apron, her hair tied back in a messy knot, and her eyes carried a weight he didn't recognize. She didn't see him. Not really. She was just a waitress, tiredly wiping her palms on a rag, her face set in a practiced mask of hospitality. Julian felt a lump form in his throat. It had been over 2 decades. They had promised each other they would escape their dead-end streets and build something real. He had achieved it. His investment firm held assets across the country, and he was a regular name in financial journals. He noticed the slight quiver in Elena's fingers as she scribbled on her pad, and the way her frame seemed to sag when she thought no one was looking. He couldn't look away. Finally, she met his eyes. Her brow furrowed as she tilted her head. "Wait. Jules," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Julian Vane?" The melody of her voice was exactly the same, though her expression was guarded. "Hello, Elena," he said, shifting in his seat. "It's been a lifetime." She let out a breathless laugh. "I'll say, what brings a man like you to a place like this?" He could have mentioned the car trouble or the wrong turn, but he hesitated. "Just traveling through," he replied softly. He wasn't sure if this was a stroke of bad luck or a moment of fate. Before they could say more, a shout from the kitchen broke the spell. Elena looked back toward the swinging doors. A massive cook in a sweat-soaked shirt yelled out an order. She quickly jotted a note on her pad and hurried toward the counter. She balanced heavy plates with a grace born of grueling repetition, navigating the cramped floor with ease. Julian watched, tapping his fingers against his cup. In his world, people waited for him. Here, he was just another patron in a long line of hungry strangers. When she finally returned, she slid into the seat across from him for a fleeting moment. "Okay," she said with a tired smile. "It's definitely you. You still have that same intense look when you're thinking too hard." He gave a small grin. Some habits die hard. Elena's eyes took in his expensive watch and the polished leather of his shoes. "You look like you've done well for yourself. Where did the world take you?" Julian paused. In a place like this, billionaire was a word that built walls. He didn't want a wall between them. "I work in finance," he said carefully. "It keeps me on my toes," she hummed. "Finance? Like a bank teller?" "Something a bit bigger than that." She smiled politely, but he could see the skepticism in her gaze. She didn't pry further. "So, Indiana is just a stop on the map for you?" she asked, glancing back as a bell rang from the kitchen. "Yeah, just a brief delay." "That figures," she said, standing up. "Most people here are either locals or very, very lost." He laughed quietly. "I think I'm a bit of both." She took his menu. "I'll get your food started. Don't run off." Julian watched her move through the room. calling out names and offering smiles to people who didn't always smile back. He remembered their late-night talks about opening a gallery together, a place for local artists and dreamers. Seeing her serving breakfast instead of curating art made his chest tighten. But more than that, he was struck by how well she hid her struggle behind that uniform. He found himself needing to know the story she wasn't telling. A few minutes later, she set a plate of eggs and toast in front of him. "This one's on me," she said. "You don't have to do that, Elena." "I want to," she insisted, sitting back down. "It's not every day a ghost from the past walks through that door." He watched her as she refilled his mug. There were fine lines at the corners of her eyes, marks of both laughter and a lot of long nights. Her hands were calloused and a small scar marked her thumb. "So," she said, stirring her own drink, "what's the big city life like? Are you just crunching numbers or something more?" "Something more," he admitted. "Large-scale acquisitions, property, global markets." Her eyes widened slightly. "That sounds like a lot of pressure." "It has its days." She nodded. "Good. You always were the hardest worker I knew. Remember when you used to help me with those literature essays even though you hated reading?" He smiled. "I remember. I only did it because you were the only reason I passed chemistry." Her laugh was genuine this time. "Fair point." She took a sip of her coffee, her gaze falling to the table. "It's surreal seeing you here. It makes me think about those old dreams we had." "The gallery?" he asked. "Yeah." She gave a wistful smile. "Life just went a different way, I guess." Julian wanted to ask what had happened, but the air felt heavy. "How long have you been back here?" he asked. She shrugged. "Long enough. The work is consistent. It keeps things moving." The flatness in her tone told him everything she wasn't saying. A group of loud patrons walked in, and Elena's professional mask snapped back into place instantly as she stood to greet them. "Duty calls," she said, sliding out of the booth. As she walked away, Julian picked at his meal, his thoughts racing. This was Elena, the girl who once swore she would run her own company, see the world, and never settle for anything less than extraordinary. Yet, here she was, compromising every single day. He couldn't stop wondering what had smothered those dreams. Julian stayed in that booth far longer than he had intended. He watched Elena navigate the room with a practiced ease, balancing heavy trays, sidestepping a toddler darting between tables, and laughing at some old-timer's story she had surely heard 1,000 times. But the facade had cracks. Whenever she thought she was unobserved, that light in her eyes vanished. She paused once to rub her wrist as if it were aching. She would gaze out the front window for a heartbeat too long before shaking it off and returning to the grind. When the morning rush finally died down, she drifted back over, leaning against the edge of his table. "Do you keep in touch with anyone from the old neighborhood?" she asked. "Not really," he admitted. "Life just moved too fast." "Yeah, I get that." Her gaze dropped to the scuffed floor. "Though my version of fast looks a lot different than yours." Julian didn't miss the bitterness in her tone. "Do you want to talk about it?" She hesitated, then glanced back. "Not here, not with Silas eavesdropping." She nudged her chin toward the cook, who was pretending to scrub a counter while clearly straining to hear their conversation. Julian gave a slight grin. "Are you free after you clock out?" Her eyes flicked toward the wall clock. "If I can get a coworker to cover the last hour, maybe, but—" She trailed off, biting her lip. "Why? What's this really about?" "Just catching up," he said, though he knew it was more than that. He needed to understand the gap between their childhood ambitions and this dusty reality. Before she could answer, a man in a grease-stained cap waved an empty mug. "Elena, more coffee." She exhaled slowly. "The story of my life." As she turned, Julian noticed a faint limp in her stride, subtle but undeniable. Something told him her journey had been far more grueling than she let on, but he had no idea how deep the struggle went until they sat down later and she laid it all out. The cafe was nearly deserted by the time Elena returned to the booth, this time without her apron. Her hair was down, softening her features. She looked less like a tired server and more like the girl he once knew. "I've got 30 minutes before the next shift starts," she said. "You wanted to talk, so let's talk." Julian leaned in. "I want to know how you've been. The real version." She gave a dry, hollow laugh. "Are you sure you want the truth?" "It's the only version I care about." For a moment she just studied him, weighing whether he could actually handle it. Then she took a deep breath. "Fine. After high school, I landed a full ride to the University of Chicago. I thought that was my golden ticket. But sophomore year, my mother got sick. I pulled out to take care of her. The medical bills piled up, and the savings evaporated. After she passed, there was nothing left to go back with." Julian listened in silence. "I married a guy who seemed solid. I thought he'd help me get my feet back under me. Turns out he just wanted a wife who wouldn't ask where the paycheck went. When I finally looked into it, I found out our life savings had been dumped into high-stakes poker games in Atlantic City. He vanished 2 years ago. Haven't seen a shadow of him since." Julian felt a sharp pang in his chest. "And you've been stuck here ever since?" "Yeah, I tried other things, but this is stable. There aren't many options in a town like this if you don't have a degree on the wall." She shrugged, as if that simple fact explained the tragedy of it all. "Elena," he started, but she cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't. I'm not telling you this for a handout or a pity party. It's just how the cards fell. Some people strike it rich, and some people end up serving them eggs." He shook his head. "I don't see it that way. You didn't lose. You just got sidelined. That's different." She smirked. "That's easy to say when you're wearing a suit that's worth more than my car." He leaned back, his eyes searching hers. "Maybe, but that doesn't mean I've forgotten where I started, or the person who helped me survive it." Her expression softened slightly. "So, what are you getting at?" Julian didn't answer immediately. The idea forming in his mind was much larger than a dinner invitation or a gift. He knew that if he spoke his next thought aloud, it would shift the trajectory of both their lives. Julian waited until the lights dimmed. They walked out together into the cooling evening air, the cafe's flickering neon sign buzzing overhead. Her car, a battered sedan with peeling paint, was parked crookedly at the curb. She tossed her apron into the back and leaned against the door. "So," she said, "are you going to tell me what's on your mind, or are we just going to stand here looking at the sunset?" He slipped his hands into his pockets. "What if I offered you a way out of this town?" Her brow furrowed, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Out of Indiana? Or out of this life?" "Both. The cafe, the struggle, the cycle that's been weighing you down." She crossed her arms defensively. "And then what? You just fly in and rewrite my reality? That's a fairy tale, Jules. That's not how things work." "Sometimes it is," he said softly, "when someone cares enough to provide the leverage." Her face hardened. "I'm not looking for a handout." "It isn't a handout," he countered. "Think of it as a long overdue debt being paid to the person who believed in me before I had a cent to my name. You're the reason I survived high school. You're the reason I didn't walk away when things got tough. You have no idea how much those moments changed my life." She looked away, her eyelashes fluttering as she fought back a sudden wave of emotion. "Even if I considered it, what are you actually suggesting?" "A position. Not just employment, but a career path. My firm manages several luxury complexes in Chicago. I need a regional director for one of them. It's professional work with a real salary and full security. I'll handle all the training." She snapped her head back toward him, stunned. "Are you for real?" "Completely. You've always had the intellect for it, and I know your work ethic is unmatched." Elena let out a quiet, breathless laugh, shaking her head as if trying to wake up from a dream. "That's a lot to process." "Don't rush," he said. You don't have to give me an answer tonight, but I'm not asking because I feel bad for you. I'm asking because I know you're capable of a life much bigger than this town could ever offer." She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she watched a transport truck roar past, its headlights cutting through the dusk. "You make it sound so effortless." "Sometimes the hardest part is just deciding to move," he replied. For a long minute, the only sounds were the hum of the cooling pavement and the buzz of the café sign. Finally, she looked him in the eye. "I'll think about it." But Julian could see it in her posture. Something had already ignited. For the first time in a decade, she was envisioning a future that didn't involve a serving tray. The following morning, Julian was finishing his breakfast at a nearby inn when his phone vibrated. An unrecognized number. "Hello?" "It's me." Elena's voice was tentative, slightly trembling. "I've been up all night thinking." He set his cup down. "And?" "I'm terrified," she whispered. "It's been so long since I stepped out of my comfort zone. But if the door is still open, I want to walk through it." A slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. "The door is open. My team will send over the paperwork today. We'll get you settled next month." There was a brief silence on the other end. Then she spoke softly. "Thank you for seeing the person I used to be, Julian. Not just the woman behind the counter." "You never stopped being her, Elena," he said. "You just got lost in the fog for a while." When he ended the call, Julian felt a rush of energy he hadn't experienced in years. The same spark they had shared as kids, sitting on that fire escape and dreaming of the impossible. 3 months later, Julian walked into his Chicago headquarters. Elena was seated at a sleek mahogany desk, a headset on, navigating a complex software system with absolute confidence. She looked up and beamed. It wasn't the tired, forced grin of a waitress. It was a radiant, soul-deep smile. "Hey, big shot," she teased. "You're going to mess up my workflow." He laughed. "Just checking to see if you're still here." "Where else would I be?" she said, and he knew she meant it. As he walked away, Julian realized how simple it had been. One conversation, one moment of recognition, and 2 lives were forever altered. Sometimes helping someone doesn't mean carrying them to the finish line. It means opening the gate and reminding them they have the strength to run. If there is someone in your life who has lost sight of their own potential, don't just tell them they can succeed. Provide the spark. You never know when one small act of faith might lead to a spectacular second chance. A few months into her new life in Chicago, Elena had become Julian's most trusted advisor. But while her professional life was flawless, Julian noticed she remained strangely detached, never buying a house or settling in. One Friday evening, he walked into her office and found her staring at a small, grainy photograph of a young boy he had never seen before. "Elena, who is he?" Julian asked gently. She didn't flinch. Instead, she let out a long, heavy breath. "That's Leo. He's the reason I stayed in Indiana, Jules. And he's the reason our meeting wasn't the coincidence you think it was." Julian felt a chill. "What do you mean?" "The man I married. The one who gambled everything away. He didn't just leave," Elena whispered. "He took Leo, our son. He fled 2 years ago, and the last lead I had was a sighting in that small town near the diner. I didn't work at the Rusty Spoon because I had no choice. I worked there because every trucker, every drifter, and every traveler passed through those doors. I was a human lighthouse, waiting for a flash of my son's face in a passing car." Julian sat down, stunned. "You were hunting for him." "I was," she said, finally looking at him. "And the morning you walked in, I had just given up. I had signed the papers to move to a different state to follow a new lead. When I saw you, I realized I couldn't do it alone anymore. I needed your resources, your private investigators, your high-level security contacts, your reach." She turned the laptop screen toward him. It showed a security feed from a quiet suburb in Oregon. A small boy was playing in a backyard. Your team found him yesterday, Julian, not because of real estate or finance, but because you gave me the power to search where I could never reach before." But then came the twist. Elena stood up and handed Julian a resignation letter. "But there's something else you need to know. The flat tire on your car? It wasn't bad luck. I saw your car at the gas station 3 miles back. I recognized you instantly. I knew who you had become. I knew that if I just asked for help, you might say no or give me a check and walk away. But if you saved me, if you felt like the hero, you'd stay invested until the job was done." Julian stared at her, realizing that every emotional moment in that diner, every hesitant word, had been a masterclass in manipulation. She had played on his guilt and his ego to save her child. "So, what now?" Julian asked, his voice thick with a mix of betrayal and admiration. "Now, I go to my son," Elena said, picking up her coat. "I'm not the girl who needed a job, Julian, and I'm not the director of your firm. I'm just a mother who used the only tool she had left, an old friend's conscience." She paused at the door, looking back one last time. "You gave me a second chance, but I'm the one who chose the destination. Thank you for being exactly the man I hoped you'd become." As the door closed, Julian realized that the most profound act of help he'd ever given was based on a lie, yet it was the most meaningful thing he had ever done. He hadn't rescued a victim. He had been the engine for a woman who was willing to set the world on fire to bring her son home. Sometimes, the person you think you're leading is actually the one guiding you exactly where they need you to be.